social epidemics are caused by trends hitting something that Gladwell would call the tipping point, where suddenly their growth just explodes into the stratosphere. Something that was once a small trend by a specific unique group of people, or maybe like trendsetters, suddenly hits the mainstream and goes viral. The thing is though, this process isn't completely random, okay? It can be observed and calculated. This tipping point only occurs under the correct circumstances. Circumstances which we can observe and control and try to make the most of. And these circumstances are controlled by the 3 agents of change. In this video, we're going to be looking at these 3 agents of change and how they control something from being a small trend to becoming a social epidemic. The 3 agents of change, as detailed in Malcolm Gladwell's incredible book, The Tipping Point, are this. Number 1, the law of the few. Number 2, the stickiness factor. And number 3, the power of context. And these 3 agents of change control whether something stays as a small trend or whether it explodes. Now, there's this common misconception, okay, that this is down to luck. That when things suddenly go viral, when they become social epidemics, it's just by chance. And actually, what I think this book and this video hopefully is going to show, that just doesn't have to be the case. Yes, there can be luck involved, but if you understand these concepts, you can use them to your advantage. Whether you're a marketing genius for a gigantic firm or you're just starting your own small business, whatever stage you're at and for whatever reason you want something to grow and expand, understanding these 3 laws and these 3 agents of change are going to help you hit the tipping point. So number 1, the law of the few. Now, the law of the few is a really fascinating and interesting concept, but it's also incredibly simple. And what the law of the few basically says, suggests, entails is that social epidemics happen because of a few exceptional people. These are people with incredible social skills, vast networks and connections. They're people who have incredible energy and enthusiasm, and also they're people that people trust, that are reliable, and that their word counts for something. So for most of us, and this is definitely me included, we get to know and become friends with people very similar to us. People with similar interests, people who look like us, people who live in the same place, all that kind of criteria. And that, you know, that's totally okay. That's pretty normal in human life and existence. However, what this means though, is that we actually only have a very small sphere of influence, or not even that, like capacity to share information. You know, that means our ideas, our trends, our potential social epidemics are kept within a really small circle because it can't spread further than that. Most people as well who fall into this group, which is the majority of us, prefer to have a smaller group of strong ties, you know, those deep relationships, those friends who we know lots about, and have, you know, a smaller group of friends, even in this age of Facebook and friends and social media, than actually having a vast network of weak ties. Our preference is for the former. And now I just want to be clear here, because this is very different from being an extrovert and being an introvert. We're not talking about that. Yes, there might be similar preferences, but this is a situation where that's a 50-50 split. We're talking about a large majority of the population falling into the category we've just talked about, and a very, very small amount falling into the next one. Now, who are these elusive, rare, important people that I'm talking about and that are talked about in this book? They are a magical people who can kickstart a social epidemic. They're people who can take a small trend and turn it into a global phenomenon. These people are labelled by Gladwell connectors. Connectors are rarities, like I've already said. They're kind of like dragons or unicorns, like mythical rare beings that you don't really think exist but have incredible power. What is their superpower? It's literally in the name. Connectors connect the world. They are the ultimate spreaders of ideas and trends and social epidemics. And in a world where, whether we realise it or not, word of mouth still reigns supreme, they are the ultimate spreader. What makes them special, or what exactly is a connector? And I think, although they are rare, we probably all know them. Who connectors are? They are a rare group of people, very unlike me, who are incredible at connecting the world. They're incredible at building what we'd call weak ties. They're the person that, you speak to anyone and they seem to know them. We all know people like that, right? And what they have mastered is this ability to have this weak tie where they may have only met someone once or twice in different social settings, but they're amazing at remembering names, they're amazing at staying in contact, and if they run into each other again, they're amazing at initiating contact and being like they've always been friends. And what is significant about this is, unlike most of us who have this very small circle and network, they have an incredibly vast network in which they can call on at any time. And it's also a network in which they can share ideas, and often their voice has a lot of credibility. So let's say they come across this group of people who, for some reason, for a trend, have started wearing their shoes on the wrong feet, and they're like, this is really weird, but I like it. And so they go away and they tell friend after friend, weak tie after weak tie, hundreds, thousands possibly of people, and suddenly this idea has spread beyond this small group of friends to a vast network of people. They know everyone, and they have this incredible ability to create social epidemics. There's this theory, right, called the 6 degrees of separation. You may have heard of it, and it's basically this theory that we're all 6 social connections away from everyone else in the world. A friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend. I think that's right. But in this book, Gladwell clarifies this a little bit more and explains actually how it's not quite what we think. To quote Gladwell, it means that a very small number of people are linked to everyone else in a few steps, and the rest of us are linked to the world through those special people. And who are those special people we're talking about? Connectors. So it might not be a whole friendship group, through, if you go out and make a diagram and just spread out all your friends and lines going off to the rest of the world, that you're going to have 6 degrees of separation, but it's actually through these connectors. Through a connector knowing a connector knowing a connector knowing a connector knowing a connector, you can probably access the whole world. Connectors literally connect the world. They're the kings and queens of word of mouth, and they are so important in creating change and creating social epidemics. Our second agent of change, the stickiness factor. Now, our previous agent of change was all about the messenger. However, this one is about the message. The reality is, no matter how good the message has to be good. For it to stick, for it to catch on, for people to buy in, what you are offering, the idea, the trend, the thing, it has to be sticky. The content of a social epidemic matters. It has to be attractive, it has to be meaningful, it has to be significant in people's lives. An epidemic, right? It has to be worth spreading. And this is what Gladwell describes as stickiness. And this is so important in creating trends, and it's probably the most known part of, research and advertising and that kind of thing, is you have to know what people want now and what they're going to want in the future. What things bring meaning to people's life, or what are they receptive to? And when you understand that, you've hit the jackpot. Gladwell claims that when something is packaged so well, when your information, your trend, your thing, it will be irresistible. That when a connect comes along and they hear about it and they see it, they find it, they just won't be able to help themselves but share it, and then all their contacts can't help themselves because it's so irresistible. Now, that must sound really obvious, but the reality is this is not an easy thing at all. Packaging something perfectly to make it a global phenomenon, that's no easy feat. Now, the first part to sort of help with this or help you understand this is that Gladwell unpacks in this book through this really great piece of research actually to do with kids and television, that people buy into stuff they understand. If people don't understand something, they're going to get bored, they're not going to find it meaningful and impactful in their lives. So you've got to explain to people why this is important. Then the second thing to understand with this, and actually maybe just come to terms with, is that you're not going to catch everyone. The reality is everyone's personalities, tastes, genetics are different, and so just because one thing sticks for one group of people doesn't mean it's going to stick for everyone. A great example in the book of this is nicotine, right? So there's some research done into the addictiveness of nicotine, especially amongst teenagers and the first time of smoking and that kind of stuff. There's this misconception that the first time you smoke, if you ever smoke, suddenly you're going to become addicted to nicotine straight away. And what has actually been shown by research is this is only true for 40% of the population. Now, that's still a staggeringly large amount of people that their genetics allow them to become addicted to nicotine straight away. But that also is 60% of the population who it isn't sticky for. So that's really important to remember. Stickiness isn't universal. You can't catch everyone. But that does not take away from the importance of knowing what you're selling, making it the best it can be, because stickiness is important. And then number 3, our final agent of change, the power of context. In school, right, like when I was when I was like 16, 17, 18, I studied this subject called sociology. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, Google definitions says it's the study of development, structure, and the functioning of human society. So I guess it is just looking at society. Anyway, in sociology, right, we learned about this theory called broken window theory. And the concept is that in broken window theory, it states that the smallest changes can make the biggest impact and can cause tipping points. For example, a broken window. Let's say you're walking down the street, you're in the middle of a city centre and you see a broken window. No one's fixing it, no one's doing anything about it, and then you're going to walk past it again and again, and multiple people are going to keep walking past it, and they're going to see this window and they're going to think, no one's done anything about it. It must be okay to break windows. And so another window gets broken and another window gets broken, and suddenly this whole culture, a social epidemic, has almost been created by this one small incident that people think it is okay to have broken windows lying around. However, the theory also states that, let's say you have this broken window. If that window is quickly replaced, that behaviour and that social epidemic will never set in, it will never happen, and people actually will observe the culture that when they see a broken window, it's there to be fixed, because broken windows shouldn't be around. One small act, or even a lack of action, can make a big difference. And both in my sociology lessons and in this book, the case study for this was New York City. So crime was at an epidemic rate, literally. It was a social epidemic during the late 80s and early 90s. It was, press all around the world. I wasn't actually alive then, so I can't state that I saw it on the news, but it was a thing, right? And the good people of New York, all the people within the police forces, government, they did not know how to fix it. They tried thinking big scale. They tried, what is the biggest thing we can fix? How can we change it? And none of it was working. Then came along these crazy people who had this idea and said, hey, why don't we start on the small things first? Why don't we start really, really small scale and see what impact that has? And the two specific things they targeted were the New York Underground. And so the first thing was on all the trains, carriages, apparently it was just like full plastered in graffiti. And what they did is they cleaned up all the graffiti. They changed that physical environment and context so it looked different. And then the second thing they did was they noticed that there was a ton of people who just were not paying for their fares on the underground. They'd skip over the machines. They just were having none of it. And so they started putting more police officers down there to enforce people paying. And again, this change in the environment, this small change in that context had a big impact. And as this happened and was enforced over a number of years, the crime epidemic changed. It hit a second tipping point where suddenly crime rates started plummeting and, didn't get rid of all crime, don't get me wrong, but it stopped it being this amazing social epidemic. Small shifts and changes within the context, within people's physical environment meant that their behaviour shifted and changed. It was a new epidemic. And so what the power of context says in short is that the people around us, the environment that we are in, the smallest changes can make a big difference, and actually that environment, that context shapes our behaviour. And so therefore, to understand why some trends turn into epidemics, we need to look at the environments in which shape them. And so there you go, there were our 3 agents of change, the 3 things which are really key to understanding social epidemics. Honestly, I can say I have just scratched the surface on what happens and is detailed in this incredible book. Malcolm Gladwell's Tipping Point is, it's phenomenal. It's really worth a read. Like I said, there's so much more. I think what always impresses me about Malcolm Gladwell is that it's just full of examples and case studies to justify what he's saying. He's not just writing this theoretically. There is study after study after study. And so this is a phenomenal book. If you want to learn more about this stuff, pick up a copy for yourself, give it a read, because I will have only just scratched the surface. If you have enjoyed this video, if you have learned something new, please consider dropping a like below, subscribing to my channel, maybe even share this with a friend or a family member that you think could learn from this. I've been Ash Porter. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.